How you doing today, Kyle?
Oh, I'm doing good. Doing
Good,
good. Tired, but
good,
good.
good, good. So tell us about you.
Yeah. Thanks, Betty. Yeah. So I am from Utah in the US, and I am married to my wife, Morgan. I have three kids and one more on the way. So that
Wow.
occupies a lot of my life.
Hmm.
um, yeah, I started my career, as far as professionally, I started my career in a call center. I started as a temp job. That was kind of the intention. I planned a job hop while I was going through college, and while I was there, I moved up kind of fast and had an opportunity to be a trainer. Part of it was just that opportunity came at the right time, and I was a little lucky. But yeah, so I jumped into training and development, and haven't left since. If you've checked out my LinkedIn profile, that's kind of where I've been for most of my career, is in something related to corporate training. And now I am building Instruction Studio. I did a little stint of being a full time freelancer for a little while, and that was fun. And then I learned that full time freelancers don't ever get to take vacations unless you don't want to get
Nope.
paid.
Hmm.
And I wasn't one of those freelancers that made enough money to like say, yeah, I'll take 6 months off. So I am now transitioning over to building Instruction Studio. It's my effort to build a business and to build a company, an organization that will enable me to still have a lot of the freedom I had when I was a freelancer, but also not maybe be able to, take vacations.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be nice.
So, but yeah, that's me. I mean, I guess the last thing I'd say, I love learning. I mean, that's like the cliche thing of someone in L&D to say, like how much you love learning. But I have a lot of passive interests in like electricity. I do a little bit of coding. I do a little bit of animation, and it's really, really easy for me to get sucked into new things.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Especially if I meet somebody that's passionate about it. I love talking to passionate people, because if I talked to a gal that hunted mushrooms once, and now I find myself. I mean, I'm by no means an expert, but I tell people about this mushroom hunter I met and how cool it was that she was able to find all these different mushrooms. And anyway,
Yeah.
kind of cool.
I mean, that's a skill for your resume. Depends on where you want to work, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
So what are some of your biggest accomplishments in life and in work? What would you say?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So, um, my family is probably the biggest accomplishment. I know that's another big cliche thing, but I think a lot of people would say it. Um, I and this has less to do with professionalism, but I am really proud of this. But my wife and I have gone through different challenges. I think marriage is hard for everybody, and we've gone through different challenges, and I can say now that I honestly believe I have an awesome marriage. It's incredible. I love being married to my best friend. It hasn't. I mean, we've always had good things, but my undergraduate degree was in family studies, and through that
Mm.
experience, I got to learn a little bit about divorce and marriage and therapy and stuff like that. And I, it, that's been my greatest adventure, is being married. so,
Yeah.
um, so that's I guess that's the big thing on my list. But as far as like achievements professionally, I love that I've started a business. I think I've taken risks that a lot of people aren't always willing to take, and that makes me excited. I can't say that I've like reached where I want to be, right? But I've done a lot of things that I've really wanted to do. I've sustained myself on my own income before, where
Mm.
I wasn't employed by anybody, and I just basically was working off of sales, I guess you could say, that I made myself. Um, I've I yeah I think those are probably the biggest things that I'm proud of as far as my
Yeah.
career.
Now, you're in the you're in the armed forces, right?
Yeah, yeah, I'm in the
Yeah.
National Guard. Yeah, Air National
Okay.
Guard. So I'm a generator mechanic. Actually, I decided to choose a job that's something completely different than my day to day, because I wanted to learn a new skill. Kind of goes back to that
Yeah.
learning thing.
Yeah. You
um,
wanted to tinker a little bit.
exactly. And I've had the chance to tinker. It's been a lot of fun. Um, yeah, and that's a big part of me. I'd say I really enjoy being when I initially when I joined, I didn't anticipate loving it. I kind of joined out of a little bit of an obligation that I felt that I should do at least one enlistment, and then now I'm coming up on the end of my first enlistment, and I'll almost certainly enlist again. It's turned
Hmm.
out to be an extremely positive experience on multiple levels, and in many ways that I didn't expect. I work
Hmm.
with a lot of people who are very different from me, which is awesome. Um, and I've had the chance to learn things and be places that I never would have been before. So
Yeah.
it's awesome. I absolutely love it. If anybody ever, I don't know about all the armed forces and across the globe, but I'd say if anybody was questioning whether they should join the U.S. Air Force, I'd say it's a go.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
So
Good. Okay. So, what would others say about you? We've talked about sort of what your view of your biggest accomplishments, but what would they say are your biggest accomplishments?
you're asking the hard questions. It's
These
hard
are the
to
hard questions. Yeah,
it's hard
for
to
sure.
think about what other people would say about me. I think, and I'll break it into two categories. I'll say some good things and I'll say some bad things. That way it doesn't sound like I'm sitting on one end or the other. But I think the good things that people would say about me is one that I am a bit of a visionary. I believe wholeheartedly in being able to have a dream and then be able to achieve and go after that dream. And I just believe that that's an awesome thing to do, even if you don't reach your dreams. Like I'm the guy that's like shoot for the moon and reach the stars type thing. Um,
Hmm.
I I I get excited about living a full life and being able to really just go for what you really want. Um, and sometimes that's helped me, and sometimes it hasn't. I think people would say I work hard because I do put a lot of time into my business. I try to also I spend a lot of time with my family. It's funny. Um, Something that my family and I love to do. We spend weekends at the office sometimes, and I know that sounds lame, but we got a big TV and a Nintendo Switch there, and so it's kind of fun because the kids
Yeah,
get to come and they'll sleep over at the office while I do a little bit of playing, a little bit of sleeping. So it's fun.
yeah.
And working. I guess that's what I meant to say. A little bit of playing, a little bit of sleeping, a little bit of working. Um, but I think that's probably what folks would say. And folks say I'm a good trainer. I do teach. I think I'm good at teaching. And
Hmm.
I really enjoy doing teaching. As far as the things that people say that maybe aren't the most flattering, I do have a little bit of I panic if I'm not in control sometimes.
Mm.
I don't like that about myself. I don't want to be like that control freak. And I think I've learned some strategies to kind of help me not be a micromanager when I work with people. But a little part of me is like always like, if I don't know everything that's going on, then I'm like getting stressed out. Like I get some
Hmm.
anxiety. Um, Another thing, I'm not patient at all. I am very impatient. Um, I don't like waiting for things. I'm one of those people that will pay a lot of money to get something faster.
Uh-huh.
Whereas, if I could just wait a few days, I would save a lot of money, but I don't care.
Uh-huh.
I'm
Yep.
very impatient. Um, so I mean, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah. That gives us a good perspective. So, what has been your experience with imposter syndrome?
Ah, well, so thinking about that question a little bit, the first experience that came to my mind was actually my first job. So I was a trainer, I was at a call center, and I moved up kind of fast out of, various reasons. I think I did a good job where I was at. I think I was good. But I also think that they were hiring like 30 temporary trainers at the time because they were hiring a bunch of new people and they needed a bunch of new trainers. So they hired me. And at the time, I was one of the youngest people on the training team. I was like 20 years old. All of my peers were at least 5 years older than me, and most of them were 10 to 15 years older than me. I felt really, um, yeah, I felt like I felt nervous, and I felt like I could do the job, but I also felt like everyone was looking at me like I couldn't. Um, and I think, like, just to speak to my whole experience, I questioned whether or not people would take me seriously, and I think as a result, it made me make some poor decisions in the way that I was, because I was technically in a leadership position, when I was training people and um, teaching people, because we at that time I was training, we had like an 8-week training program in that organization. So I would be
Phew,
with, yeah,
that's a long time.
it was a long training program. I don't necessarily, looking back, I don't necessarily think that it was the best um,
Oh, yeah.
training program actually, but it was pretty good. It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. But it was definitely long, and usually by the last 2 weeks, like, people were burned out.
Mhm.
But I did make some decisions, I think, because I felt a little bit like everybody was kind of watching me. I would sometimes, I don't know what else to call it other than call it power plays. Like, I would kind of show my
Mm.
authority in ways that I would hate if I had a boss that did that, or I would hate if I had a trainer that did that. Because, I mean, I mentioned that I like to be in control. Autonomy is super important to me when I'm working. And so if a boss doesn't give me autonomy, that's like one of my biggest turnoffs. That's where I basically go, okay, yeah, I don't want to work for you. But I wasn't giving that to other people, and I think it's because I felt like I had to show my authority.
Mhm.
So that was, I don't know, that was my first experience, and it was hard. And I remember in my training class one time, there was a gentleman who was much older than me, and he said, and I was just talking to him, almost having like a heart to heart. He was quite a bit older than me, almost like a father figure type guy. I mean, I worked with these people for like 8 weeks. And I told him my concerns. I said, hey, I worry that people just don't take me seriously. And he said, and he was like, nobody is looking at you that way.
Mhm.
Um, that is, that you're in your own head. Nobody is looking at you that way, um, because you don't behave that way. You were hired for this job for a reason. And it kind of surprised me. And it was nice to hear.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That was my first experience. The second experience that I'll share real quick was actually with
Sure.
my business, with Instruction Studio, what I'm doing now. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn now. I used to not be. I was like the LinkedIn lurker. I had like 4 or 5 thousand connections, mostly just from me. Like, I kind of saw the power of LinkedIn from the back end. And so I was just like finding people that would be potential hiring managers later, or people who might be able to help me move forward my career. But I was never really posting or sharing or anything like that, mostly because I didn't feel like I had anything to share. Um, and then I started Instruction Studio,
Mhm.
and I had to market my business. And I didn't know anything about marketing. Like, a lot of this I've been learning on the fly. But I learned pretty quickly that LinkedIn was one way that I could get business. And the best way for me to do that was to share the things I knew about training, to share the things that I knew about instructional design, even just about professional environments in general. Um, but it took, like, my first post, I was a little bit, and it feels silly because I'm just talking about posting on social media. I don't think this was anything that was really all that big of a deal, but it was making me very anxious. And
Mhm.
I worried so much because for a while there, I had been following other people on LinkedIn, people with successful businesses, people who were in the training industry for 20 plus 30 years,
Mhm.
way more experience on paper than I have. And you always, I don't know, I didn't necessarily feel like I was the one that should be giving advice, and to some degree I still feel that way And it makes me a little bit nervous when I post on social media. I mean, obviously now I post almost every day, but even still, I always am kind of, I don't know. I'm not always quite sure what to post. I don't want to act like a know-it-all. I
Mhm.
mean, I was posting about getting business when I had never gotten business myself. And I don't know if that's bad, but I didn't know what I didn't know what to do. I really
Yeah.
didn't. Um,
Yeah.
all I knew is I had to make money and I had to grow this business. And I never posted anything I didn't think wasn't true. Like I never was like straight up lying, right? But I would take things that I guessed or that I knew from other experiences, and then and then I'd post those in the form of advice. I don't know. Is that kind of what you're looking for?
It is. It's actually exactly what I'm looking for. So when I'm guessing based on what you're saying that you still struggle with imposter syndrome
Yeah,
from
yeah, a
time
little
to
bit.
time. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because I
So
mean, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so when you are in the midst of feeling this imposter syndrome, what does it feel like? Like, what are the emotions? Do you have any type of physical reaction? Like whether it's posting or talking to somebody or, um, leading a team, when you have these feelings of imposter syndrome, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like?
Yeah, yeah, that is a good question. Usually when I feel it coming on, when I'm thinking about it, um, it's usually comes in the form of kind of just an anxious feeling. A little bit of heartbeats, I think. I definitely get the sweats. I kind of hate to say it, but that's totally my reaction, right? And I'm
Mhm.
definitely nervous. Um, I would say that it does get better the more like I still face it a little bit, but the more you face those challenges and kind of just kind of brute force your way through those awkward, uncomfortable situations, the better you get at it for sure. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean that's usually my experience. I want to say I can hide it okay. I think I do hide it okay.
Sure.
Um, but I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
I'm feeling the anxiety.
Are there specific thoughts that you have when that's going on?
Yeah. What I usually think about is and it happens to me most frequently when I see people that I want to be and I'm in their company. And by company, I don't mean their organization. I'm in their presence, either
Mhm.
online or in person. And I don't really feel, I mean, worthy sounds like a funny word because it's not, I don't know. And I feel a little bit silly for feeling that way too, because I feel like, that's not a bad problem to have,
Mhm.
to be in a position where, my first example where I was able to get promoted at a fairly young age. That's not a bad situation to be in. A lot of people would be
Mhm.
grateful to be in that situation. And I am extremely. But that doesn't mean that I'm definitely still sitting there thinking, you know, sorry, my mom called me.
Mom.
I'm definitely sitting there thinking, um, am I really worthy to be here? If that makes sense.
Mhm. Mhm. It does. It makes a lot of sense. So when you have these thoughts, these icky feelings, this anxiety, how do you cope? Do you have techniques that you've put into practice or what do you do that makes it better?
Oh, yeah. Um, well, first I have to remind myself that it's coping to me is it's a mental game. I don't really have any physical things that I do to cope with this challenge. To me, it's all a mental game. So I walk myself through certain things. One is I have to ask myself like, so what? right? If people like, what if I post on LinkedIn and somebody calls me out for it, and says, Kyle, you don't even, you don't have a big successful business. I've never heard of your company. Why are you posting advice? What if somebody calls me out on it, right?
Mhm.
Or what if somebody doesn't respect my authority when I'm in a position of leadership and I'm trying to lead a team or a group? Um, Really, to some degree, I mean, when I ask myself that question, so what? Usually the answer is like, it doesn't matter. Like if I fail, the end result, like if I think 2 or 3 years down the road, or even like a week down the road, it probably doesn't matter in almost all cases. I mean, sure, I might be playing big game for, playing bigger game than I've ever played before, but I'm
Mhm.
not really in anybody's spotlight. And if I screw up, I can try again next time, and
Sure.
I'll reach a point that I won't screw up. So that's one of the things that I do is I'll say, I'll just ask myself, so what, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is, I mentioned that usually I feel this way if I'm in the presence or with others who, I feel like I'm not worthy, or I'm in a position that I really don't deserve to be there with them. And I try to mentally, again, it's a mental game. I'm reminding myself that they were where I was once too. Um, One of the things that gives me a lot of encouragement is if you look at any given entrepreneur and look at their LinkedIn profile, if they do the LinkedIn thing, um, it is not uncommon for uh, them to have a graveyard of failed businesses
Mhm.
before they're successful brands that you recognize. And that's not always the case, but I'd say that's the majority. Um, when you look at those who are successful, they usually have a series of, the person who's now working as the VP of Google or some big brand that you recognize, they have other businesses that they've worked for that were not all that fantastic.
Mhm.
Um, they've been through the gauntlet of trying and failing and trying and failing, or maybe taking the less than desirable roles or positions. They've done that,
Mhm.
and so they were there once too, and really they don't have the same experience that I have. I come with a really unique profile, a really unique background that others haven't seen before, and that
Mhm.
really is something quite unique to me. And I won't move any further until I take that step, whether it be that feeling of discomfort because I'm trying to be a business owner, or whether it's I'm just starting out my career. I have to take that step into that space where maybe I feel a little bit less than worthy, or a little bit less than prepared. Um,
Mhm.
I have to take that step at some point. And then the third thing that I would say, Betty, is I know that I think there's a lot of advantages and benefits to being transparent and to being vulnerable, but I don't necessarily think you have to or should be with everyone. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, you'll come across people that you can't trust, people who don't
Mhm.
trust you, people who don't want the best for you. And what I've found is when you find someone who you can't be transparent with, I'll give you an example. I had a boss once. So generally speaking, I like to believe that I have a lot of integrity. I try to speak the truth whenever I can, and I try to be generally a good person. I think I do okay at it. Um, but I once had a boss that we had a really bad and negative relationship, and as a result, I found myself actually having less integrity with this person,
Mhm.
because when I was honest and I did have integrity and tell this particular person about challenges or shortcomings or anything like that, the response was always very harsh. And
Mhm.
as a result, I started to kind of turn into that person that my defense mechanism was, oh, just don't be transparent, don't be honest, don't tell the truth about what's going on. And I didn't like that I was becoming that person. Um, but I found that that did happen. And so I guess my point here is one way to deal with this challenge of imposter syndrome is to be transparent and vulnerable. But in order for you to be in that position, in order for you to be in a position where you can be transparent and you can be vulnerable, you have to find a tribe or a group or people that you can trust, that you can be vulnerable with, whether that's a
Mhm.
community online or whether that's a team that you work with in your profession, or even if that's just your family. Um, by finding people that you can trust, you can actually express some of those self doubts that you have and say, "Hey, look, I'm
Mhm.
struggling with so and so or such, or with my job with this or that," and they can give you some really solid and good encouragement and advice. But you couldn't do that if you didn't have that community. So I guess my point is, so the three you asked, the main question you asked was, how do I cope? Well, one, I just
Yes.
ask myself that so what question, right? And then
Yeah.
second, I look at others and I say, they were there once too. And I try to compare myself to them in a more rational way. And then thirdly, I find someone I can trust. And then I am vulnerable and transparent with the people who are worthy or trustworthy, I should say, of that vulnerability and that transparency.
Yeah. Very cool. I like to call those people my board of directors.
Yeah.
And I have a board of directors at home, and I have a board of directors, maybe at work, and then I have a board of directors within the industry, and these are the people that I trust with my deepest, most vulnerable thoughts, and some of them, whether they like it or not. I mean, I don't have to be on their board for them to be on mine. So it's nice when that happens, when it's copacetic, but it's just not, it doesn't always happen that way.
For sure. For
So
sure.
what would you share with someone who is experiencing imposter syndrome right now?
Hmm. Well, you know, um, first thing I would say, I mean, all those mechanisms that I talked about, how do you cope with imposter syndrome? I think those are things that you could try doing yourself. They may not work for you. Or they may not work immediately, right? Like if you're in a really toxic environment professionally and you're not really in a position to just quit, sometimes that's a challenge, right? But
Mhm.
if you're struggling with imposter syndrome, you feel like you don't belong where you are, what I would do is maybe just walk through some exercises that may make it a little easier to rationalize where you currently are. And what I mean by that is maybe sit down and write a list of what things have you done that make you qualified. Um, you may also want to ask yourself why. I mean, I felt imposter syndrome before because I was working in environments that I didn't really enjoy or wasn't
Mhm.
passionate about, and I wasn't really enthusiastic about it. And so as a result, I didn't really feel like I belonged. And so in those cases, sometimes it does make sense to identify what you're passionate about and go another route, and jump into something new. But there's a I don't know. Have you heard of Jai Jang, Betty?
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. No, what's
So
that?
well, he's a man that wrote a book called yeah.
Sorry, I said, "What's that?" I thought you were talking about like I don't know, like
No,
a
that's okay.
restaurant or like a new martial art. Like, I don't know. I'm sorry.
No,
Apologize.
you're totally fine. To be honest, I totally could be butchering his name, and I don't think
Okay.
I am, but I don't know. His name's Jai Jang. It's Jia. That's his first name, and then
Mhm.
Jiang. Um,
Okay.
he wrote a book called Rejection Therapy, I think is what he called it. Basically, in a nutshell, and he has a TED Talk out there too. You could watch his TED Talk and actually glean a lot in just those 15 minutes. But he went through an experience where he went through 100 days of rejection. He gave himself a challenge to try a different dare, a different ridiculous ask. Like one of the things he asked was if he could borrow $100 from a stranger. So if he went up and just said, "Hey, can I borrow $100?" And of course, these things that he was daring himself to do, they were things that he knew were absolutely ridiculous, and as a
Mhm.
result, would almost 100% get rejected. And that rejection it comes with a lot of sting. And I think actually that those feelings of rejection, they cause us to doubt our self-worth in whatever
Mhm.
sense, whether it's our professional sense or whatever you might say. But he went through this experience over and over and over again, to the point where rejection started to not have nearly as much of a sting. And it got to the point where he actually got some yeses to some very ridiculous requests. um,
Wow.
and but that's not the point. The point wasn't that he was getting acceptance, but the part of the reason, that point he was making, was the reason why he got acceptance was because he was able to go in with confidence and not be afraid of rejection, and basically
Mhm.
go into the situation knowing that, hey, the worst that, basically asking himself that question, so what, right? Like, what are they going to do? It's funny, he talks about an experience. He went into a restaurant and asked somebody for a burger refill, because, instead of getting a drink refill, he's like, hey, can I get a refill on my burger? And of course the answer was no.
Uh-huh.
But from that experience, he's like, now I'm not afraid, and I'm not intimidated by a situation or by a given person, because the worst that they can do to me is say no. And when they say no, I still have everything I had before I tried, and I'm still 100% capable of trying again. And anyway, he has a really, really fascinating story. So um, I think, I mean, that's not directly talking about imposter syndrome, but I think facing rejection and being able to go up against it with confidence, I think
Yeah.
that's a huge part of recognizing your self worth, which is directly connected.
Yes. Very cool. So one more question. I have just one more question for you, Kyle.
Yeah.
Why did you want to be part of this imposter syndrome project? What made you say yes?
Hmm. Um, I think partway one, we've never spoken before, Betty. Like,
Hmm.
I've seen you
But
around LinkedIn,
oh,
and
you
I'm
see me
like,
around. Yeah.
yeah, I've seen
Creeping
you
around the
around.
corners in LinkedIn. Yeah.
Right? I've seen you around. And I'm
Yeah.
like, man, Betty's doing cool stuff. Here's a good opportunity to engage with Betty. Um, but no, the other part that I think really resonated with me when you were asking for folks to be able to volunteer is, I really feel like I've been there. I feel like, I mean, one of the things is, I've had my business now for like 2.5 years. And for that time, a lot of that time has been not making money, like basically just muddying through the water. And all the time, people will ask me about my business and how it's going. And I get that gut wrenching feeling of, oh, well, it's going okay. Like, I feel like I have to explain myself, and I have to explain to people why I'm not the CEO of Google yet, right? Because I chose to be an entrepreneur. Um, so I feel like that piece resonated with me in particular, because um, I I feel I'm not even over that still. I still sometimes, depending on who I'm talking to, I do sometimes have to defend myself, and it feels uncomfortable. And when I say I have to defend myself, it's a little bit irrationally. Like most people, it's kind of like that situation that I talked about where the guy said, told me, at the beginning, that nobody cared, and like, people did take me seriously, but I thought nobody did. Sometimes I feel the same way about my business, right? That people look at
Yeah.
me and think, oh, he's not a real entrepreneur. Oh, he's not a real business owner. Um, and there's probably a lot fewer people thinking that. And even if there are people thinking that, I should be just saying, so what? Who cares? Um,
Yeah.
so when you ask, why did I volunteer? Well, that's why, because I
Yeah.
feel like I've been there, and I don't think I'm alone, but it's always
You're
interesting
not.
to be able to share with people who've had similar feelings.
Yeah. And we so appreciate your vulnerability and sharing your story. I think it's going to help a lot of folks. So thank you, Kyle.
Good. Thank you, Betty. Glad to be here.
If you like this series and you want to show support, go to buymeacoffee.com/ifyouaskbetty to learn more about how you can support this and future If You Ask Betty projects.